Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this seminar on airborne infectious diseases, describing ASHRAE position document and also reviewing or referencing ASHRAE COVID-19 preparedness resources. My name is Professor Lubomir Jankovic from the University of Hertfordshire. And this talk has been organized by ASHRAE UK, London and Southeast Chapter. On your screens, you will see a media player where you will hopefully see me talking. You will see Q&A window where you can post your questions anytime, but please be aware that this is a one-man show, so I'll type replies or answer these questions on the fly. However, after we finish the presentation, I will stay online for a while and answer any questions live or answer them by email later if that seems to be more appropriate. We are all on lockdown, as you know, so I'm broadcasting this from home and relying on my home internet connection. So if anything goes wrong and lines go down, what I will have to do is restart this webinar and invite you again by email, by sending you a new registration link, but hopefully that won't happen. So the scope of this presentation is to reference ASHRAE resources in the context of the COVID-19 outbreak and to provide an overview of ASHRAE's approved position document on airborne infectious diseases relating to the operation of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, and also to discuss practical implications for building owners, operators, and engineers. The online resources are on this preparedness resources webpage on this address, but I will post this address on the London and Southeast Chapter website, and we'll alert you to this when it becomes available by email. And this page on preparedness resources also includes the ASHRAE approved position document on airborne infectious diseases. A word from the president of ASHRAE, Daryl Boyce, which says that ASHRAE's COVID-19 preparedness resources are available as guidance to building owners, operators, and engineers on how best to protect occupants from exposure to the virus, in particular in relation to airborne particles that might be circulated by HVAC systems. The preparedness resources page contains a variety of documents, including guidance documents, contacts for relevant technical committees, ASHRAE publications, references to ASHRAE handbook content, relevant journal papers, ASHRAE standards and guidelines, videos, and others. But we will focus on this approved position document on airborne infectious diseases in this talk. So in the position document, there is information on the modes of transmission of airborne infectious diseases, the implications for the design, installation, and operation of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning of HVAC systems, and the means to support facility management and planning for everyday operation and for emergencies. The position document covers the spread of infectious disease by small airborne particles or aerosols that contain microorganisms. The position document does not cover transmission via direct contact with individuals or surfaces. So here is how the particles from an infected person come into the air, either through coughing, sneezing, or normal breathing. And turbulence of air dilutes the droplet concentration. Droplets, if there is low relative humidity and they become nuclei, droplets are swept by the air motion and fall due to gravity, and their fall is resisted by drag force. And also, there's evidence that higher relative humidity maintains more presence of these droplets in the air. These are ejected on a ballistic trajectory, especially large droplets from sneezing mode. And when they dry up and become nuclei, become desiccated, they fall on the ground or on the bed of a person if we are in a hospital situation, and can to meters. And this is when we are having some technology issues. So if you just bear with me, please, because the next slide is not coming. Yeah, please bear with me a second. Okay, I hope we are back on track now. I hope you can see me again. There was a bit of a pause in the presentation because the technology froze. But now we can see what are the parameters of airborne infection diseases transmission. Degree of exposure to airborne infection is described with this equation, where the number of infectors and number of doses of airborne infection and pulmonary ventilation per person and exposure time are directly proportional to the degree of exposure to infection. And this is indirectly proportional to volume of fresh or disinfected air. So now we come to Wells-Riley standard model of airborne infection, which is shown in this equation, where number of new infections is equal to number of susceptibles, as ASHRAE called them, number of susceptible people, times this item in brackets, which is probability of a single infection. And within that probability of a single infection, you will recognize the previous parameters degree of exposure to infection in the exponent. So again, you can see that degree of exposure to infection is shown here in the exponent, and probability of a single infection is shown as the number in brackets. And see how these numbers work. For example, if the number of infectors increases, then there's going to be higher infection rate. So reducing number of infectors or people density decreases the exposure to infection. Reducing number of doses of airborne infection, Q, by keeping 2 meters distance, or some other means, by ventilating, as we will see later, also decreases exposure. Pulmonary ventilation per person is something we cannot control. This is an individual parameter. But exposure time we can control by reducing exposure time. Duration in high density areas decreases exposure. And let me just say that while researching around the background of this subject area, I found that an infection occurred in China, in Wuhan, where these infections occurred for the first time, in 15 seconds, when 2 people were discussing over a market counter with fruit and vegetables. So there was quite a bit of space there. Within 15 seconds, that infection occurred. So we're talking seconds rather than any other duration of time. And if we increase volume of fresh or disinfected air, that will decrease exposure to infection. For those people who have joined later, I can just reiterate that you can ask questions anytime. There's a Q&A box in your dashboards. However, because I'm speaking on my own, there's nobody who can actually help me answer these questions in parallel. I will endeavor to answer these questions immediately after the talk while we are still live, or if it turns out that that is more appropriate, I will answer them offline and send you the answers by email. So I decided to play with numbers a little bit in this exponent and in brackets. So if degree of exposure to infection is set to 0.1, if the numbers turn out in that way, that the exponent is 0.1, then probability of a single infection is also 0.1. But if the exponent, degree of exposure to infection, is 0.99, then the probability of a single infection goes up to 0.63, or 63% is the probability of a single infection if you have high concentration of people and high duration of time, and number of particles is also high, and ventilation is low. So, what are practical implications for building owners? Seems that we have another. No, we don't have a problem. Okay, I hope we don't have a problem. Please, there was just a message here to say that there was potentially a problem in the system. If there is a problem, just send me a message through Q&A, and I will try to fix it. So, in terms of practical implications for building owners, operators, and engineers, transmission through HVAC systems must be considered, and HVAC systems may contribute to both transmission of disease and potentially to reduction of transmission risk. Depending on the facility type, there are also different ways of how airborne transmission is taking place. Healthcare facilities have criteria for ventilation designed to mitigate airborne transmission on infectious disease, but most infections are actually transmitted in ordinary occupancies. ASHRAE does not provide specific requirements for infectious disease control in schools, prisons, shelters, transportation, and other public facilities. And in these facilities, general ventilation and air quality requirements of standards 62.1 and 62.2 apply, and this position document applies to all these facilities. In terms of ventilation and air cleaning strategies, we need to consider supplying clean air to susceptible occupants. We need to contain contaminated air and or exhaust the air to the outdoors. We need to dilute the air in space with cleaner air room from outdoors, and we also need to clean the air within the room. Could somebody from the audience please just enter in the Q&A box whether you can hear me well and whether slides are advancing? That would be really helpful if you can do that. Thank you. In terms of ventilation and air cleaning strategies, we need to consider dilution ventilation. Thank you. I just had a note that people can hear me and slides are advancing. That's most helpful. Thank you to the colleague who has sent this. So we need to consider, in terms of ventilation and air cleaning strategies, dilution ventilation. And I'll talk about it in the next few slides. And then laminar and other in-room flow regimes, differential room pressurization, personalized ventilation, source capture ventilation, filtration of central or unitary, depending on the system, and also upper room ultraviolet germicidal irradiation. ASHRAE position document states that ventilation represents a primary infectious disease control strategy through dilution of room air. And this corresponds directly to Wells-Riley infection equation that we saw in a few slides ago. Also, highly efficient particle filtration is likely to reduce the airborne infectious particles, and directed supply and or exhaust ventilation is important in several settings, including operating rooms. Now, just to recap on this, in terms of dilution ventilation, we need to consider using 100% of fresh air or cleaned air. We should not use recirculated air under any circumstances if there is infection going within the building. In terms of filtration, cough-generated droplets are of the size between 65 to 3.3 microns. Exhaled breath droplets are of the size between 0.3 microns and 1 micron, and that is actually 80% of these droplets. They can be larger than that, but 80% of droplets falls into this range. And I must say, although some research has been conducted into this subject area, the actual size of droplets from exhaled breath is not completely determined. So more research needs to be put into this area. Now, coronavirus size is around 0.12 microns, and it is going to be contained in droplets. So when we want to filter the air containing coronavirus or any other kind of virus, we need to be filtering the droplets. And for instance, HEPA filters eliminate 99.95% of droplets that are larger or equal than 0.3 microns. Depending on which standard you take. In Europe, it's 90, US it's 99.97, I think. So we need to have very good filters that can actually take out droplet sizes of this magnitude, and using any other filters that are not as good is not going to clean the air. It's not going to reduce the airborne infection transmission. Also, unidirectional low velocity flow helps to clean droplets from the room air. If you have low flow unidirectional air, low velocity flow unidirectional flow air, that works as a piston in a internal combustion engine, and takes particles out of the room. But if you have turbulent flow, as in the right-hand side of this, bottom right-hand side of this slide, then that is not going to clean the air, and you might actually increase the transmission of airborne infection. A bit more about ventilation and air cleaning strategies. Under no circumstances we should be driven by energy conserving strategies if there is a risk of airborne transmission of disease. So energy conservation, including demand controlled ventilation, should be used with caution or not used at all. Operable windows is not covered as a method of infection control by most ventilation standards and guidelines, but in the absence of anything else, it does help. We also need to consider room pressure differentials, as these are important for controlling airflow between areas in a building. For airborne infections, we need to put these rooms on a slightly negative pressure with respect to the surrounding areas. And we are talking only a few pascals of difference between positive pressure. And in hospital rooms with immune compromised individuals who have weakened immunity systems, these rooms need to be kept at positive pressure in protective environments. And I'll show how that works. So basically, on the left of this slide, you have airborne infection isolation room. We put it onto a slightly negative pressure, only a few pascals difference between that and surrounding room. And infection is not going to go out. Airborne particles are not going to go out. But if we want to protect people with immune compromised systems in these rooms, and we put such rooms on a slightly positive pressure, just several pascals, and keep surrounding rooms at negative pressure. There are also personalized ventilation systems, and they can supply 100% highly filtered or UV disinfected air, and they may be protective. However, there are no known field studies that justify the efficacy. There are also temperature and humidity considerations, and ASHRAE position document refrains from making a universal recommendation about these parameters. There is evidence that controlling relative humidity can reduce transmission of certain airborne infectious organisms. Lower humidity changes droplets into droplet nuclei and make them fall on the floor. There's also evidence of lower inhalation of droplets at higher relative humidity, but also at higher relative humidity, droplets can survive longer in the air. So there's inconclusive evidence and contradictory evidence about the role of relative humidity, which is why ASHRAE doesn't make a universal recommendation. Breathing dry air could cause a desiccation of the nasal mucosa and susceptibility to respiratory virus infections. And there's no sufficient evidence that maintaining temperature and relative humidity reduces airborne survival. There are also non-HVAC strategies. Allowing and encouraging employees to stay at home when ill is more effective than any other HVAC intervention, as we pretty much know now because we are in that situation ourselves. Prompt identification of patients with illness and use of respiratory hygiene Source control is also important as a non-HVAC strategy. And high efficiency personal protective equipment may be considered, such as N95 respirators, masks that remove 95% of airborne particles that are 0.3 or higher microns in size. These respirators are only slightly less effective than HEPA filters. HEPA filters remove 99.95%, as we saw in one of the previous slides. So for emergency planning, increasing dilution ventilation and increasing relative humidity, or quickly applying upper room UVGI is effective, provided that this does not create either flow of air to less contaminated areas or conditions of extreme discomfort. Creating pressure differentials may be the appropriate strategy, and actions should be undertaken in collaboration with infection control professionals. So this needs to be a teamwork between engineers and infection control professionals. And knowledge of the system operation and the nature and source of the threat are very important. All facility designs should allow, should follow the latest practice standards. So obviously facilities that are designed to a substandard requirements, then they are not going to work. And this is especially important in emergency situations where new wards are open to fulfill the demand. But if these wards are not capable of maintaining differential pressures between the wards and surrounding rooms, then these are not really designed to the latest standards. And proper commissioning, maintenance, and proper operation of buildings and systems for controlling airborne infectious diseases are necessary for buildings and systems to be effective. Well-designed and installed and commissioned systems and maintained systems can be enhanced with supplemental filtration, UVGI, and increased ventilation. And filtration and UVGI can be applied at moderate additional cost. Healthcare infrastructure needs to quickly respond to a pandemic in emergency wards, admissions, waiting rooms, and crowded shelters. And HVAC systems can separate high-risk areas. HVAC systems need to have a capacity to upgrade filtration very quickly, the ability to increase ventilation as high as 100% of outdoor air, the ability to humidify air, and the ability to enable effective upper room UVGI. So this is ultraviolet germicidal irradiation at the upper room and ceiling heights of at least 2.4 meters. Infection control strategies should always include multiple interventions, not just ventilation, and multidisciplinary teams of engineers, building operators, scientists, infection prevention specialists, and epidemiologists should collaborate to identify and implement interventions and to understand the uncertainty of the effectiveness of current practice recommendations. building operators and engineers have a role to play in planning for infectious disease transmission emergencies. And this is pretty much why we're holding this webinar. More general standards and guidelines should strengthen requirements for the following: for improved particle filtration, for central air handlers, for upper room and possibly other UVGI interventions. And electrical infrastructure needs to be there to quickly deploy these solutions. So the ability to quickly and temporarily increase the outdoor air ventilation rate is also tremendously important. And it is also important to avoid lower ventilation levels motivated solely by reduced energy consumption. Researchers should receive input from many disciplines, experts, and control propagation resulting from various ventilation rates, and to quantify the relative airborne infection control performance and cost effectiveness of specific engineering controls individually and in field applications. Research should quantify rates of airborne removal by filtration and inactivation by UVGI strategies, ultraviolet germicidal irradiation strategies, specific to individual organisms. Research should also field validate in real facilities the effectiveness of these interventions in preventing transmission, and research should be conducted to better characterize the particle size distribution of coughed materials, as there's a broad range of diameters, and there's quite a variety of literature that I've found that gives different particle sizes for exhaled particles from healthy individuals, for coughed and sneezed particles from ill individuals, and so on. There's a range of particle sizes to establish what we are doing and eliminate these problems. So this presentation was an overview with some of my personal professional interpretations of issues, but please consult the following for details: the COVID-19 coronavirus preparedness resources on this ASHRAE website, and that document includes ASHRAE position. That site includes ASHRAE position document on airborne infectious diseases, which we have overviewed here. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Lubomir Jankovic from the University of Hertfordshire, and I also represent ASHRAE UK, London and Southeast chapter. And I will now go to have a look at the questions. I haven't seen any questions yet, so if there are any questions, please send them to me via your Q&A boxes, and I will stay online for a while to answer all these questions. Thank you. Okay, well, while waiting for questions, can I ask, have colleagues found this useful? Okay, now we have a few questions coming through. Will the slides be available or the links? Yes, I will put the slides on the, I will put a link to the slides on ASHRAE London web page. And I have your email addresses, so I will inform you when this is available. It will be in the next few days. So there's another question. Is a warmer, dry climate better than a cold, humid one? I'm not really sure, because we are talking about transmission within a building. So that is where we are controlling the transmission, and therefore it doesn't really matter what kind of climate is outside if we are dealing with these issues inside. In dry, if for example we have just ventilation and not conditioned air in the building, then warmer, dry air would perhaps contribute to a faster evaporation of airborne particles, and then they will convert into nuclei and will fall on the floor, and then it depends how long they can survive like that. There is also evidence that a dry climate can actually speed up the susceptibility of people to airborne infectious diseases, and we should therefore control humidity, although our ASHRAE position document doesn't actually make a position on that. Okay, so I'm just going through other questions. And now my questions have frozen. So let me see if I can get them back up and running again. Thank you for all your comments. Our presentation was informative and some nice as well. Thank you, Maria. We have international audience today, so it is a kind of sign of world coming together. Yes, okay. Right, lots of positive comments. Thank you very much. I'm glad that we didn't crash, that technology has served us. So I will stay online just a few more minutes to see if there are any questions, but I'm just getting responses that presentation was useful and thanks and so on. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Okay, here is a question. Are you aware of any research to establish if COVID propagates in wet cooling towers or humidifiers? I'm unaware of any research like that, and I think we will probably need to wait for some time before anything like that can be researched, because priorities now are propagation in internal environments, and so the answer is no. I'm unaware of that research. Okay, so happy to answer any other questions. So the list of questions is kind of exhausted now. Okay, well, I think considering that there are no other questions, perhaps we can close the webinar. If you feel that you would like to contact me about anything, then my email address, my contact details are on this slide, which I hope you can see. And I will inform you when the slides are on the ASHRAE London website. And thank you very much for attending. So I will close the webinar now. Thank you very much, and please keep safe, and I hope you remain healthy and well under the circumstances. Thank you, and goodbye.